can't record. I just want to record it. And they took out the chat feature, so I can't message her. So it's only, I just keep hitting record and it sends her a little note that someone wants to record it for you. Maybe we can share some.
There were like 4 meetings, I think, today.
Were there?
Yeah.
Just waiting for me to have the host, that's all.
Oh, okay. We'll keep it silent until you start hearing it.
Thank you. Heidi, if you can hear me, can you pass over host, please?
Oh, she like coordinates the Zooms.
The poor woman is probably trying to set up 3 or 4 simultaneous meetings.
Oh, yeah, yes. 4, yeah.
Heidi,
Will do.
thank you so much.
The agenda lists all topics which will be discussed at the meeting and those least.
Yep, there was another one she was just doing.
Recording in progress.
All right, we're ready. Good evening. It is 7:01 p.m. Well, I already have something to admit. 7:01 p.m. on January 18th, 2024. I am calling the Lunenburg Finance Committee meeting to order. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over the Lunenburg Public Access channel and on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page. The following information is provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link attached to the agenda, which can be found on the town calendar. From a telephone, dial the toll-free number 888-475-4499 and enter webinar ID 898-7675-2952. This agenda lists all the topics which may be discussed at the meeting and are those reasonably anticipated by the chair. Votes may be taken as a result of these discussions. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by open meeting law. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, starting off, are there any announcements from the committee? Hearing none, okay. I just have the one usual plug that I'll have that I'm going to have in there for the next 4 years, or 3 years, I suppose. The planlunenburg.org website, it's on the agenda. There is still a survey that's going on until the January 21st, so this is the last 3 days to finish it. I have not heard any updates for how many people have actually responded to the survey from last week, but hopefully it's more than the week before. And again, on February 1st at the Adult Activity Center, there will be 2 sessions to go over the results of the second survey and also to have a discussion with the public for further information. The first session will be from 4 to 6 p.m., the second from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., and they are identical, so feel free to just attend one rather than both. And with that, is there any public comment from the public?
Good evening, Anna Lockwood, 91 Main Street. I also serve as the chair of the Parks Commission. I saw in your agenda that you had reorganization of the committee for today. And I just want to say, as a chair of the Parks Commission, it's been great working with this board this past year. I truly feel like, having the Finance Committee is interesting because you guys really don't have a lot of power other than to advise. But your advice has been helpful in bringing committees and boards and day-to-day together. And that's where I do appreciate actually the way your charter is set up, where the day-to-day operations is to the town manager and the boards and electors sort of like oversee it. And that murky middle is really that part where everything that's beautiful happens, where you have accountability for each other. And you guys really served that well this year, and especially with Marshall Park coming up. It was very important, the report that we have had, and Chris has been our liaison, and he was also a part of the capital planning, and he was our advocate there. So, whatever new shape you guys take, I just want to say thank you. It's been great working with you, and looking forward to working with you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment from the public? Seeing none, any public comment from the committee? Mr. Passios.
Thank you. Just wanted to comment on the state budget cuts that we have been hearing about the last week or two. I happened to catch a pre-recorded interview, John Keller, with one of the members of the governor's financial staff. And John had more or less asked him a question as to, how are human resource services being affected by the cuts that have been announced? And I don't have his name, but I think he's one of the speakers at MMA this weekend on that subject. I need to fact check that. But anyway, he was saying that, he was claiming that a portion of the cuts are not really cuts. They went to department heads or whoever was in charge of the budget line items for certain areas and said, asked the question, do you really expect to spend this money before the end of the fiscal year? And he claims that many of them came back and said, no, that will be money that, I'm assuming the state does the same thing we do, that would be surplus at the end of the fiscal year. So he's claiming that a good part of the numbers that are being cut are money that would not have been spent anyway. A little bit different take than, earmarks being cut. I wouldn't be surprised if both were cut, but a little different take on how they were selling it to the public through the media. Thank you.
I'm interested to see what the MMA has to say about that this weekend.
Definitely.
I've already seen a few that are sessions that I think will be useful for it.
Yeah.
Any other public comment from the committee? All right, moving on to the town manager report. Do you want to just lump it into the presentation? Okay, so we'll skip that for now. I have old business on here, but I don't have any old business unless anybody else does. Does anybody have anything else that they want to bring up from the past and rehash? Perfect. Hearing none. Moving on to new business, the town manager report and capital plan recommendations.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our newer members, and welcome back, Dave. It's been a while since there's been a full stage, so it's nice to
Hope
see.
you got a little rest since Monday night.
Me?
Oh, that was a long day.
Yes. Yep, I got home after midnight. I'll just start by adding on to that 9C cut discussion. I don't know if everyone received my email. So I did participate, and it was basically an open office hours with the administration on Friday, and sent along, it's a detailed list of the cuts, and they were earmarks mostly, and they were cut by 50%, and the other portion of money was Mass Health for those cuts. So, and I did ask question how it relates to the emergency shelter costs that were unanticipated this year in the budget. Their response was that it was already budgeted for, but in essence, the supplemental budget was that in the fall happened was a big portion of that increase. So I think it all, personally, I think it all relates to the overages. But I did feel bad for the communities that received earmarks this year and hadn't spent those funds yet. They're the ones being penalized at this point by being cut 50% of their earmark, where other communities who had spent those funds aren't obligated to pay those back to the state. So that's the news on the 9C cuts.
Is that a lesson learned for future earmarks to spend them before the new administration starts?
It's sometimes very difficult because a lot of the time you're waiting for the paperwork from the state.
Mm-hmm.
So I've many times had to chase the state agencies saying, when can we anticipate the contracts for these funds?
Mm-hmm.
And some aren't used to giving types of earmarks. Usually it's line item appropriations in their budget, so it's unique to them, so it's taken longer.
Okay.
So it's not on the fault of those towns.
We just lucked out.
And it takes time to put a bid together, to go through that whole process as well.
Okay.
So, and I did hear personally from another town administrator today, they had been requesting, like, what's the status of our earmark? And we're getting crickets. So, and that was back in September. So, for other updates, and I'll go back to, not sure if everyone watches the select board meetings, so those are pretty much my main updates that I give on financial. We went out to bid for the generator project. That project came in at $99,940. So we are able to cover that within the appropriation. There was a little surplus and a couple other completed projects, so that's going to be transferred to that line to cover. There's a slight overage there, so that will be moving forward. The public safety carpet project, those bids came in and was awarded, and that came in under the appropriation slightly. So that project is moving forward.
Do we have timelines for those yet, or is it still too early?
So the generator project, the generator, once it's put out, ordered 16 to 18 weeks for delivery,
Okay.
which actually is a lesser time frame than some other manufacturers.
Okay.
And the carpet project should be finished in March. The state contacted me today regarding the flood storm costs that happened this fall. And there's going to be an announcement this weekend by the governor at the MMA that they are appropriating funding for that, or it's already appropriated. They're going to be announcing that it was part of the supplemental budget bill in the fall. So there was $5 million in that appropriation in the fall budget for particular to the September storms. So Lunenburg was one of those communities who submitted for reimbursement. What they're waiting for is the FEMA allocation. They haven't announced the FEMA allocation. So once those federal dollar amounts are known, then they can know what they can allocate to all the communities.
Have you accounted for everything on that?
Bill Bernard did.
Because there's still damage out by my house from that storm that has not been fixed. And if we're going to get reimbursed, then,
I would contact Bill regarding that.
okay.
But I know he has tracked the expenses related to that.
How much do we expect to get reimbursed?
That won't be known until the state knows the FEMA numbers.
Did we apply for a certain amount?
A certain amount, all the tracked expenses were submitted. So I believe it was, I don't want to be quoted, but I think well over 100,000. Police are
I
probably
remember you
to
saying like
200.
130 or something like that, somewhere around there.
That makes sense. The third quarter estimated taxes went out. The revaluation project is on schedule for the assessments, and that's looking like it's all coming together. So I'm sure the assessors will be having periodic updates on that. If you saw our meeting on Tuesday, we hired a finance director, town accountant. Yay. Very happy, as is Karen Broche. So he'll be starting on February 5th. It's his start date. So
I didn't understand, I did watch that meeting, and I think there was a question about it, if Karen is going to continue to stay on. I didn't understand
She will
Or maybe I missed the answer.
stay on a limited, obviously, not, she's been working 1 to 2 days at most a week.
Okay.
So she has agreed to stay on to help mentor him and show him the ropes,
Do you see that like through this budget season?
as long as we can retain her,
As long as you're nice to her.
the budget. But I know she doesn't want to be forever.
No.
She's looking forward to retirement, especially summertime when she likes to go to the Cape. So we are lining up all, support systems for him
Okay.
to hit the ground running. And I think that wraps up what I have for updates if you want to get into, unless there's questions.
Is it too early to invite him to the February 8th, or the February 8th meeting?
I would say give him a couple weeks.
He'll have a few days. Just to
Yeah,
introduce
maybe
him.
a couple weeks in.
Of course.
You're on payroll for 3 days by then.
Knowing Karen, she's got a perfect document laid out for him.
A lot of it's up here.
Yeah.
But yeah. With a lot of people who have years of experience, right?
Any follow-up questions for the report?
You were having some significant issues with Munis. What's the status? of-
Sewer billing is, yes.
I thought the town in general was having issues.
There's been, not to that degree. It's been minor things like that when the pay stubs go out electronically, they're not going out electronically, they're getting sent out, but then a ticket has to get submitted, and then there's a workaround. So that, things like that, nothing as far as data. The sewer utility billing, they're still working almost daily with Munis on that.
Heather, do you have any idea when we might be able to expect a thorough quarterly report? I know it's been difficult with the situation and with the new director coming in. It's going to be pretty difficult to bring one in the near future, but I made
At
the
this
comment
point, yeah, I wouldn't estimate when that would be. Karen's focus is obviously the priority items. Right now, getting 1099s out, because there's a deadline for that, getting the Schedule A filed, those are important deadlines to meet that she's on top
I
of.
made the comment at the last meeting. I don't know if you've seen the tape or you
I
listened.
did.
I'm just concerned because it gives us a temperature of where we are and where we're going in the present fiscal year as we're talking about the next one.
Yeah.
I understand. Thank you.
I can comment generally on the budget. I know there was questions about any challenges we've faced this year. Obviously, staffing shortages is number one in my opinion. We've been fortunate to get some consultants to fill certain gaps, but not to the permanent level of the position. So obviously, we're spending more on contracted services and at a higher hourly rate. But, where there's less money or there's a surplus in the salary line, that will be offset by consultant costs.
Where do you see the biggest gap and shortage for staffing?
That loaded question. So we've had shortage in finance director position since July, the principal assessor position since June, the land use director since October. So those are 3 main departments. And we filled the conservation administrator position within the last 2 months or so. So there was a significant backlog there. So that's the issue. When there's a void like that, obviously, employees have to report up to the next level. So I've taken on a lot of those responsibilities of questions that need to get answered and daily things. We've had new staff, so training people on our system. We had a migration of our main accounting software system. So there was a lot happening at once.
migration of accounting software is a really big deal.
Yes, it was
So
a.
how was the town of Lunenburg marketing for those open positions?
I did a thorough presentation on staffing shortages. I can refer you to that, but we use a number of resources, social media, MMA, association websites that members, so the accounting association, people who are in that field would look to that association page. We've gone to benefit job fairs. So a number of different ways we've actually cold called people, reached out to colleagues to see about if they knew of anyone. We've reached out to other organizations that do temporary hiring, to consultants to see if they knew of people that were looking.
Yeah, I can understand the strain it takes on existing employees because you're forced to wear multiple hats, and it's extra resources to have to hire consultants and contractors, obviously. So that's something interesting that I didn't know about. That's something that I've just learned.
Yeah. I can send you the link to the presentation.
Great.
too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But I think we're headed in a better direction. Finance director, Monday night, the assessors are meeting to ratify a principal assessor position. So those are two main positions. We've unfortunately not had a lot of luck with the land use director position for applicants. It's a somewhat unique position.
Have we had applicants just unqualified?
Two, and not qualified.
Okay.
So if you know anybody, this is my pitch.
I meet a lot
Tell
of
them to-
people, so it'd be good to research that a little bit. If I could help network that, I would.
Okay, thank you.
Heather, do we know who's going to be presenting the planning department's budget when we get to it? Have you decided on that yet?
Land use, no. Accounting, I always roll into the administration. I present on that as well as assessors. So I do the administration and unclassifieds presentation.
Do we have the job listing for the land use director as
And our website.
still, well, of course, is it encompassing the job that Adam was doing in its entirety, or was any of it
Yes.
broken off?
No.
Okay. Okay.
As it is.
So a large job.
It is a big job because I oversee the conservation, building, planning departments. But I have to say our building commissioner we have an excellent building commissioner right now. He's really stepped up. He's doing all the ClearGov permitting. He has a good background in that, so he's our guru on that. So
Is he looking
I
for a
think
job?
those people in those departments. And I know the conservation administrator, if everyone can be patient, she's dealing with a huge backlog as well for projects. So it's only so much time in the day.
Any other questions? Excellent. Let's move along to the preliminary FY25 capital investment plan.
Okay.
I have it
Are
pulled
you
up.
gonna pull it up?
I do.
There you go. Is it behind me?
It's behind
Okay,
you.
all right. I was looking over here. All right, I will start with what is our definition of a capital project? So the town's policy on capital expenditures, which is our financial policy, section 3.02, under the policies and procedures, defines capital projects as items that cost $20,000 or more and have a useful life of 3 years or longer. The Massachusetts Association of Town Finance Committees defines capital projects as major, non-recurring expenditures for one of the following purposes: acquisition of land for public purpose, construction of a new facility or external expansion or major rehabilitation of an existing one. Any planning, feasibility, engineering, or design study related to a capital project or to a capital improvement program consisting of individual projects. Equipment for public improvements when they are first constructed, such as furniture, office equipment, or playground equipment, or major equipment such as that is expensive and has a relatively long life, such as fire apparatus and construction equipment. To describe the process, our capital planning committee creates a capital plan that consists of all the capital requests submitted by each town department for the next 10 fiscal years. The capital planning committee's first meeting to begin the fiscal 25 capital planning process was August 30th. I think on the slide it will say August 3rd. It was actually the 30th. And the capital planning documents were sent to the departments in September, and the capital planning committee met with departments from late October until the end of November. The town manager uses the same software for capital request as used for the budgeting process, and I use ClearGov as that platform. And all the departments submit their request using that software and answer all the questions related to the evaluation criteria through that software. So that does all the calculations, and we can create spreadsheets from that to give to the capital planning committee. The data collected is based on UMass Collins Center capital planning documents, and this includes various categories such as effectiveness of government, the effect on the operating costs, effect on revenues, whether the project is mandated by the state or federal government, whether grant funds are available, and how the project contributes to such things as economic growth, public safety, public health, and education. Each category receives a rating and an overall score based on the aggregate score of all the categories. So the higher the rating, the higher the priority. The Capital Planning Committee evaluates capital requests based on these responses to these categories as a group, and they also review them on the merits of each of the projects. Each member submits their ranking of each project, and they are averaged to achieve a composite ranking. The Capital Planning Committee prioritized 35 capital project requests for fiscal 25 and provided me the list on December 24th. I may modify the list of capital projects as part of the proposed budget for the next fiscal year. The capital budget is presented at the annual town meeting. The total amount can be amended to be less than the article in the warrant to reflect the will of the town meeting and then voted on. This preliminary capital plan reflects the same top 10 projects as the Capital Planning Committee provided me on December 24th, with differences in 3 of the prioritization of the projects. So looking forward, the 35 capital project requests for fiscal 25 totaled $3,474,767.98. These next 2 pie charts I broke down by category, the first by overall category. So the Department of Public Works, that was 37% of the total. The school department was 25%. Town facilities and parks was 21%. Fire department was 9%. Police department was 6%, and IT was 2%. If you break that down further, of DPW, infrastructure out of DPW was 15%, cemetery under DPW was 13%, the rest of the Department of Public Works was 9%, and breaking facilities and parks down, out of that total, 16% was from facilities and 5% from parks. So this next slide is the top 10 prioritized projects, totaling $1,317,119.98. And I'll go through a short description of the 10 projects. So priority 1 was the public safety radio system, phase 2, for $315,263. Phase 2 of this project is to replace all the obsolete equipment, and it will replace the repeaters and antennas, and will add a simulcast site at the Chase Road water tank. The original system was installed around 2009, 2010, and the manufacturer has discontinued the model line, and it is difficult to find replacement parts. And these two maps show the current coverage, and after the project is complete, what that coverage ratio would be. For priority 2, it's a townwide keying card access and alarm system upgrade for $185,000. This is for town buildings, not school. This would replace the existing townwide exterior door hardware, and it would create a master key system for all exterior doors, add on an electronic key access system for the main entrances with integrated security alarms. This would allow for key control and tracking, which improves security and access control, and the centralization of key cards and access. This system is expandable, so we will eventually be able to upgrade interior locks using the same card system. It includes the public safety building, but their system will still be maintained by the two departments. The third priority is for Northfield Culvert construction, and that's Kelly's Pond for $200,000. This request is to replace the deteriorated culvert on Northfield Road at Kelly's Pond. The fiscal '24 capital plan included funds to pay for the engineered plans and contract specifications to put this project out to bid. Priority 4 is for Turkey Hill Elementary School, the ADA study for renovations and assessment and schematic design for $275,000. This project will support the hiring of an engineer or designer to develop a study to include the following areas: identify any immediate ADA noncompliance, identify the architectural barriers to meet current ADA regulations, prescribe the necessary modifications to specific areas, which include general access, bathrooms, doorways, elevator, and classrooms. Replacement of major systems, which include HVAC, plumbing, electrical, and the building envelope. It include address the construction plan and schematic designs for the proposed work and an estimated cost for the renovation of the building. This would provide important information as the town considers potential rehabilitation of that facility with MSBA funding. Priority number 5 is for the marked replacement of the K9 Cruiser for $92,211. This request is to replace the 2015 K9 Tahoe with a new Ford Expedition. The current mileage on the K9 vehicle is 83,000 miles. Once the new vehicle's on the road, the old vehicle will be decommissioned and sold. And we've been using Municipid for selling our old cruisers.
Would this vehicle be built out properly as a K9 vehicle? Because I know the one that we currently have, that K9 Tahoe was sort of built out by Officer McNamara himself.
Yes, that cost, a significant portion of that cost of that cruiser is around $34,000.
Okay.
For the upfitting for
Okay.
the.
And it'll come delivered that way? It's not something we'll have to do
No,
in-house?
it comes delivered, and then a company usually does the upfitting. Sometimes we're able to do some of it in-house.
I know the chief used to like doing it
Yes. Yeah.
when he could. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So that 92,000 covers both of those processes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Priority number 6 is for the library security camera, phase 1, for $36,000. This system is currently running on 2 separate systems, both of which are over their reasonable lifespan and need to be replaced to avoid failure. Phase 1 would be to replace one of the systems with an improved quality camera system that does not require on-site equipment maintenance and upgrades and can be added onto in the future. Priority number 7 is for the marked replacement for the traffic cruiser for $73,627. This request would replace the 2019 Tahoe that currently has 102,816 miles, and that vehicle as well would be sold after it's decommissioned. Priority number 8 is for the installation of 3M window safety film for $33,569. This would put safety film on the inside of all exterior doors with glass and inside of all the large windows on the first floor, which are accessible. And this is at the Turkey Hill Elementary School. There were 3 different projects with safety film. This is one of them. Priority number 9 is for a security camera upgrade at town buildings for $36,450. The goal is to have the town on one ubiquitous security camera system, and this would include Town Hall, Eagle House, DPW, and the Ritter Building. The Town Hall and Eagle House would see replacement of existing equipment as well as new cameras. The existing cameras that are in these buildings are dated, difficult to manage, and lack scalability. Priority number 10 is for Wallace Park, the basketball and tennis courts for $70,000. These courts have become degraded, and this request is to resurface the courts to avoid any further degradation. The courts receive a lot of use by the community if you go by there during nice weather. I don't know about a day like today, but I've witnessed this personally. This next slide shows all the projects at this point in time that are not being recommended to be funded and the total is $2,157,648. For the 10 projects that are currently in the recommendation, my recommendation this year kind of deviates from prior years in that typically I reserve free cash at a later point in the budget. This year, due to it's going to be a tighter year for our budget, I've reserved tax revenue, and I'm recommending at this point free cash and our unexpended capital that the projects that we can close out and our available resources. And I've earmarked enough funds within our certified free cash to cover what we typically put into stabilization accounts and OPEB, and that's according to our policy. We have certain financial policies regarding how much to put into those accounts.
Heather, could I interrupt for just a second?
Mm-hmm.
That number for the other accounts is in the vicinity of 300,000? Have I got it right?
Which account?
The stabilization accounts and stuff that we use free cash for, is that number approximately 300,000, or if I got that wrong in my head?
You mean the regular
Just-
stabilization account? The regular stabilization account?
Well, you mentioned 3 accounts just
So-
now that you've already accounted for.
Yes, so OPEB, trust fund, which that is, I would have to look the number. It's over $1 million in that count now.
I mean, adding in from the 25 budget. we
From the
had-
24 budget?
24, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Jumping ahead.
So that includes, I can get you those balances, but it takes those amounts that we appropriated at annual town meeting into what the current balance is. And our policy is based on the previous year's certified free cash, which we were certified this fall. It was around 1.8 million. And so OPEB is 10% of that certified amount.
Okay, and
And-
special purpose stabilization fund is usually 100,000,
250 is what,
250.
and I'll get to that at a later slide as
My
why.
brain is- Okay.
Not the balance, but reasoning why continue putting funds in that account.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And our regular stabilization, that is a percentage of the omnibus budget. So when we look ahead to, for the next 10 years, fiscal 25 to 34, I included some links in my presentation because it's a lot of data to put on a screen. So it's easier for you to just, if you want to explore and really dive into the next 10 years, all the requests by department. When we look at historical capital spending, our 3 and 5 year average for spending on capital has been around 1.5 million. And given that our total projects for the 10-year total around 39.5 million, but I do want to point out what a large percentage of those requests are. They relate to Turkey Hill Elementary School and the TCP Passios building. So both of which I'm going to point out in a couple slides that I would recommend in the forward-looking plan that we know we're going to require borrowing for both of those projects, given their dollar amounts. Both combined around 19 million, and that's just on our paper right now. We don't know that actual number, obviously, until we get further down the process, and the ADA study will bring to light maybe some more estimated costs for that project. But about half of what we have right now for request is projects we would need to borrow for. When I looked at a 10-year projection of capital needs, I know this slide is rather tiny as far as the numbers, but what I use as assumptions is the raise and appropriation amount would be 2% of our annual omnibus budget amount, and increase that by 2.5% each year of how much we should spend out of tax revenue towards our capital plan. Free cash, I used a baseline of $1 million and increase that by 2% each year. Special purpose stabilization funds are highlighted in years fiscal 27, fiscal 28, and fiscal 32. Those are based on that based on the balance we have currently in the special purpose stabilization fund and continuing to deposit a minimum of $250,000 each year, unless it's a year we're drawing down on that account. And after fiscal 28, we would continue to deposit money in that fund, and then we can draw on it again in 32. So those are significant amounts. If you look at fiscal 27, that's $1,582,500. In fiscal 28, it's $615,047, and fiscal 32, it's $1,025,190. Sorry, $25,190, yes. So not small amounts those years, but if we continue on this plan, we'll be able to fund those projects all through the special purpose.
I had a quick question on that. So how is the decision made to use special purpose stabilization funds?
That would be a town meeting vote, but it would be within the capital plan recommendation that's brought to town meeting. So because it's coming out of a stabilization account, it would require a 2/3 vote.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. This next slide is a link to how I broke out all the projects for the next 10 years by categories of raise and appropriation, unexpended capital, and free cash as one category. General fund debt, so that debt would be seen within our operating budget under the maturing debt line, and exempt debt. So I think that will be useful. I think the capital planning committee will be undergoing a longer process this year than they typically do, and hopefully this is a good starting point for discussions. Looking at next steps, we will reevaluate the fiscal 25 capital plan from now until town meeting to see if we can add additional funding that will go towards fiscal 25 capital projects and go down the prioritized list. revisit our funding sources during the budget process as more information becomes known. This may alter amounts of sources of funding to include funding from tax revenue. Continue to plan on using the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund in future years that there are large vehicle equipment needs, unless there are sufficient funds through other regular sources, such as raise and appropriation, free cash, or unexpended capital. And the decisions of the future of the Turkey Hill Elementary School, TCP, and future town offices are still a critical impact to capital planning and debt planning. That's all I have. Any questions?
About the prioritization of the 10 that are recommended on the budget, does the capital planning committee prioritize those?
They do. They provide me their prioritization list, and that was provided on December 24th.
Okay.
The list is on both, let me look at slide numbers.
23.
One of the slides has two lines.
It's on a,
Slide 23 has it.
20, also slide 11 has projects 1 through 10, with both my priority as TM priority, next to it is CPC priority. So you'll see the difference there.
Okay.
And then on the one with the projects that aren't being recommended tonight, it also has the two priority list.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Open up for questions from the committee.
I've got two quick questions. Refresh my memory, I have a feeling it didn't get funded last year, but there was, the school department had proposals for upgrade of entrances to at least two of the schools. Did those not get funded last year?
Graded entrances.
Turkey
I'm
Hill-
asking the
Turkey Hill
question
did.
because we're putting 3M window safety film on doors and windows that I believe, if we did approve that project, has not been completed yet. Is it-
Yes, there
I'm
were.
trying to sort out that.
The security, I think they were labeled security
Yeah.
grades.
Right,
Yes,
yes.
those were funded in the fiscal
were funded.
'24.
As was the vestibule for the Turkey Hill entrance
Yes.
as well, to create a second set of doors.
All it was doors? And that's been, my question is, are we doing that ahead of putting the film on any part of the structure? So that we're not putting film on structures that are going to be renovated?
I know they are working towards getting those projects hopefully completed by the end of this fiscal year. That's what I've,
Okay, and this would be in the next one, so, okay. Okay. The other comment, and I don't know if it makes sense or not, in my mind it does so far, I haven't been able to talk myself out of it, but in the historical capital spending sheet for 2024, I think it would be prudent for us to add the ARPA funds that were applied towards capital, because that money, that dollar amount skews the total amounts spent for capital if it's not in there. And the other choice was that it come out of the Special Purpose Stabilization Fund. So whichever kitty it came from, it really should reflect in that total, I believe.
I can run those numbers so you get an updated perspective.
It'll just give us a true picture of what we put in that year, and it'll adjust the averages a little bit, but not a lot.
little bit.
That's it, thank you.
Well, it would certainly bring up the 3-year average quite a bit if you put another $900,000 in there.
986.
Who's counting?
Just have a couple numbers in your head.
Yes.
The only other comment I'd like to make, as I said, I've kept silent pretty much through the capital planning process. But one of the projects that that's come forward now, and I've been involved in over the past few years before I left the Parks Commission, is the basketball court at Wallace Park. I have some reservations of anything being done to that basketball court other than complete renovation of the base and the surface. That $70,000 number was derived from, I believe, the number that was spent on that court 3 years ago, 4 years ago, because it's the same number. We appropriated, we didn't appropriate enough money to do the surface. We had to supplement it from either leftover budget money or something when we did that surface. The other comment I will make is that I started making comments to the commission at least 3 years ago, if not more, that the surface had started to peel up, so on and so forth. I went back before the weather set in the last month or so and walked the entire court, and honestly, it's not much worse than it was 3 years ago. So it isn't degrading quickly. I don't disagree that we need to do something about it, but a Band-Aid patch, I think, is a total waste of money. I meant to make this comment a month ago, but I just put it out there as a consideration going down the road that we might want to really look at whether this type of a patch job is going to really be worth it, or wait a couple more years and do a complete project, which isn't going to be cheap, Tara. You know, you're going to have to rework the concrete base, so on and so forth.
I'll have to look further into it, because I thought it was around 20,000 that was spent in around 2020 on that project for the resurfacing.
And again, I skew my numbers in my brain sometimes, and I agree, it needs to be fact-checked. But, as I say, it deteriorated quickly in the first 2 years, but it doesn't seem to have gotten an awful lot worse since then. And I don't know, a lot of people know, I visit these parks on a regular basis, like almost weekly, even off the commission. And that's the only one that I think needs to have a little bit closer look at, and not spend money on a Band-Aid when we could wait a couple more years and do a thorough, complete.
And we can look into
Thank you.
what was spent last time.
Other questions?
I have a question, but I think it goes back to the question I had during the first meeting that I attended, and it was about how the project costs or the estimates are being obtained in the bidding process. And, I just started, digging into a lot of this, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating, questions, but the one that comes to mind in particular is the ADA study for renovations at Turkey Hill Elementary School. So the cost of $275,000 is just for a project engineer and a designer to go in and see what is needed in that school. So I guess I'm curious about how that number of 275 was obtained. How did they decide that that's the amount of money they need for the ADA study to make the school compliant, which it is not currently?
I would have to check with them on that particular project. My assumption is that we have used for engineering and architectural projects a certain ratio of, after consulting with people that are in the field, of what to use for OPM costs, architectural costs, engineering costs, a percentage of the total estimated project cost. So there's usually a breakdown for conceptual plan, schematic, and then engineer drawings, and then oversight of project.
So in my career, I've done some project work based on making buildings and bathrooms ADA compliant, not schools, but buildings in general. So it's something that I do have a little bit of experience with. And if there is further information on how they obtain the projected cost of $275,000, I would be interested in seeing that.
Okay.
Heather,
I can pass that along to
Thank you.
the school.
in relationship to that, the original submittal for that particular item from the school district was a much lower number originally, wasn't it? And then they modified it to include more than just ADA. And I'll get it wrong, so I'll let you research it.
And I don't want to
No, I'll
restate
let you
without
research it
going
first,
back.
because I think they expanded it well beyond ADA compliance into everything the building's going to be needing in a major renovation as, including schematic design, if they can get it for that dollar amount.
Evan, are you the liaison to the committee?
To the school committee?
Right.
I would defer to the school committee member that's currently on the call.
I can't see that.
Yeah, I think Brian's
Brian,
on
are you
that.
listening or are you falling asleep already?
I am here. The number was adjusted because we wanted more of that the school committee wanted that overall picture for the building to help out with the building design committee as well. And I believe the superintendent consulted, I feel like with the town manager on the number to try to get a more accurate estimate of what we should put out there so that we get a bid.
I think a more of a breakdown of the description of what would be within the schematic designs in the assessment, like what are the actual achievements? Because the replacement of major systems, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, that doesn't really have anything to do with ADA compliancy at all. So does that belong in that line item? So if you were to take that out, does that change the projected cost, and would it make it more attainable to reach?
Well, I think the idea was we want that overall picture. We want the systems check, the ADA, everything. That way, building design committee could keep going. The town itself, the citizens would know. Also, for the building design committee to decide what they wanted to do with that if they take over the building.
Could it be said that possibly by separating those apart from one another, because they are different buckets, that maybe you could get more work done faster?
So from my experience on the building design committee, we've had those kind of discussions before, and most people want to do, most architects are going to want to do the whole thing, the whole project. So with the bigger number, they'll take on that project.
I can understand and appreciate the architects want to look at things as a whole, but I also think that it is relevant to tell the architects what the priorities are, because they're the ones being paid to do the jobs.
So I think going through the process here, that this was two projects that kind of got combined into one, where it was ADA and then a more just study of a bunch of other things. There's kind of a need to understand what we're going to do with buildings in its entirety. And there's a back and forth between the municipal design committee and now schools on what does Lunenburg look like in 15 years. So I think we did recommend that they kind of took that bigger view of things so that we understand what is it that we're dealing with at Turkey Hill. Could that be the community center in the future? Should we renovate it? Should we prioritize, not renovating it and building a new Turkey Hill somewhere? And I was waiting to make the comment till others had a chance to question it, but I do applaud even some of the historical on here and the 10-year projection of capital needs along with potential funding, some assumptions that went into that, because as town manager mentioned, one of the things we want to do as the capital planning committee in the winter months here is take that longer view on things. Some of us call it like, let's put the planning back in the capital planning committee and not make it a capital review committee. So I do applaud starting with this and look forward to those discussions related to the next 10 years. But just back to your specific question, it did relate to getting the kind of that holistic view of what Turkey Hill needs to get done if it is to remain a school. If we are to take state matching funds, there's a time associated with how long it would need then to remain a school, and is it really viable for Turkey Hill to be a school in 20 years from now? So that's why we kind of did it that way. The execution of it, I think you could do just like you said, have them focus on ADA so that they can get repairs in there if there is necessary to come into compliance, and then focus on the others. But to me, that would be the school committee, giving guidance and advice to the architects on how to prioritize it.
And another question I have, and I appreciate, that explanation. Another question I have is, if it were done in different phases of, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, ADA compliancy, could it possibly move things along a little faster? Because you're spreading things out a little bit more, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think out of this could come one capital plan project, or could come 10. So I don't think that it's, because it's one architectural analysis, it has to be one design and then implementation. So certainly, I think it could come in phases.
Okay.
Could I add to that a little bit? Having sat through the school committee meeting that decided to combine the two into one line item and attach a dollar number to it, and Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you were there. The goal for it being, and again, it could be done in two, but the goal that the school committee was hoping for to get out of this is a scenario, one of the possible scenarios, as Mr. Menard just mentioned, but the most important one is that what would be the potential total dollar amount to renovate that school with a single project with MSBA, so we've got that number, and then we can break it out from there. That was my understanding of the conversation when they combined these two projects. I'm waiting to see if Brian disagrees.
Looks like you're in the clear.
Yep.
Oh, he's back.
The only thing I would say is that the title, oh, go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, I would agree. I think also the ADA compliance was, the big concern was any of these big projects was going to trigger the ADA compliance too. So that was the reason we wanted that ADA number first, but I think a lot of the whole project itself made a lot more sense to understand the whole thing, big picture wise.
The fact of the matter is that the renovation project is what's going to trigger the ADA. So early on in this discussion, I questioned why we were only doing ADA, because unless you know what you're going to do for renovations, you don't know what you're triggering for ADA, with the exception if you do enough, you've got to do the whole building anyway.
I think the school committee originally was looking at that as a project that would be coming up fairly soon. They also knew that the building needed a lot of work to have a longer life beyond that, and they got meshed together. So I think, which I think is probably a good thing. The only thing I would take issue with is probably you might want to look at the title, the project title. Maybe it's a little, when you read that, it's not, it's more about the total renovation of the building, including ADA, but ADA is a relatively small piece of, I mean, if you look at all the costs, my guess is the bigger cost will be non-ADA kind of thing. So looking at that, figuring out how to get that so it can be, at the town meeting, there'll be a lot of discussion about it, I'm sure, so it'll get explained, but if people just read the headlines, that might not be the,
Question to town manager, if we ask the chair to bring that back to the school committee and they agree on a different description for that line, is that a big deal before we
The
print the
title?
warrant?
Title of the project?
The title, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a minor. I think it's meant to be ADA study, comma, assessment, and schematic designs, so.
See, I was thinking you don't want the comma, because if you put the comma in there, then you're adding on to the list of things for the ADA study. If you don't put the comma in there, you're saying it's an ADA study for renovation, and then it's also an assessment and schematic design, which you could then add on to for electrical.
Yeah. Again,
HVAC.
I don't think it's our decision to make, but I'd be more comfortable with complete evaluation of the building, including ADA design.
I think whatever fully describes what they've presented to the capital planning committee about the scope of the project and is clear to the voters then too is probably in the best interest, but we can go back to the school committee about the title.
Thank you.
Having children, having gone and still going to that school, I absolutely agree that it needs this assessment and this school needs, the long-term life of this being 20 years. Do I personally, is it my opinion that this school is going to last 20 years in the existing shape and form that it's in? No, I do not believe that. So I think getting the designs and understanding the priorities within, I do think that's important, and it may help the finance committee, the capital planning committee, town meeting, members of Lunenburg understand where that money is going and where it needs to go to first. Because if you look at this as a whole, it's obviously a lot of work. And I noticed that it says that this is something that would have to be borrowed. The town is not going to be able to pay for all of the renovations to Turkey Hill Elementary School out of our pocket. So it's going to require borrowing. And when you're looking at a long-term project like this, you can obtain quotes and bids for HVAC, plumbing, electrical, ADA compliancy, but 2 or 3 years down the road, obtaining those quotes, it may not necessarily be the same cost as we've seen. Especially after, the pandemic of 2020, we've seen large inflation on a lot of these line items. So I think I am interested in seeing how they obtained the number of 275 for the assessment of the project. And I am in agreement that separating these line items would help prioritize, what comes first, the chicken or the egg. But I think long-term, to stand on the ground of all of these line items to fully repair and get the building up to where it needs to be so that it can last for 20 years, I think that budget's going to morph and change as the economy does.
There were two things, or
Go ahead.
maybe just one, that I wanted to bring up that I mentioned at the select board's meeting on Tuesday, was as a reminder that this is just a snapshot in time. As we can see from one year to the next, this year's plan has 4 million more than last year's 10-year plan. So from year to year, this changes. And if you going forward in later years, you'll notice a drop-off in amounts. And that's, I think, because departments, they know the next 5 years is easier to project than the next 10, and that's part of it.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of conversations about infrastructure as part of this, and we're seeing a lot of infrastructure projects that kind of pop up. I almost think we need to have like almost like you had your assumptions that we're going to be spending X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in infrastructure, and just, even if we don't know what it is, that kind of plug that into the plan. So that was kind of a big discussion point this year, was things like infrastructure projects. The other thing that, we talked about was kind of that fleet management approach. And I think we kind of understand, police and fire and all that. But there was quite a bit of discussion on the DPW on the fleet management. And, I noticed the front end loader kind of bumped up a bunch of spots, and that was kind of a contentious issue. So I don't know if we'll get to $2 million this year, but I think the CPC was pretty convinced that we were not ready to say that that should go forward. So I think, up to about number 14, generally aligned, right? A couple up and downs, but there's a couple, like R27 became a 16, R23 became a 17. Those kind of wild swings I'm less comfortable with. So maybe by just a comment at this point.
I'd have to say that this year was different for me in looking at the prioritization of the committee members as far as alignment of the committee. There were, if you look at, if you dive into the committee members' individual rankings of projects, their projects were the extreme opposites. So there wasn't a unanimous consent on a lot of the projects, which was different from other years. But that, everyone has that document, so you can look yourselves. But I spent a lot of time on prioritization. And I may have a different perspective as far as buildings, departments' needs, because I hear that from the departments more frequently.
As a slight rebuttal to those last comments. Again, I've been fairly silent on this issue, but I did make the comment in the previous meeting that the town has grown tremendously, and we have not kept up with the town's growth, neither in equipment, personnel, or the ability of creating departments to handle aspects of the town, whereas surrounding towns have a complete department for parks. They have a complete department for cemeteries. We're 12,000 residents plus or minus. We're a good-sized town, and we're not a poor town. That's why we don't get state funding. Disadvantaged towns with more disadvantaged people get the funding, and we don't because we're a fairly affluent town. So I think I made the comment at some point that I don't think this year is the right year for the loader, but I think it should be added to the fleet within the very near future. And there's other equipment that we do not have, as simple as an air compressor and a jackhammer. What DPW in the whole country doesn't have one of those as part of their equipment for their operations, day-to-day operations? It's stuff like that that we have not built into our infrastructure in this town to allow our employees to do the work that needs to be done. Thank you.
Another question I would have, we talked a little bit about whether there was a need to bring on a grant writer or something for the town.
Are we talking capital planning or are we talking budget?
Well, it's kind of related, because one of the things we talk about through the capital planning is whether there's grants available for things. And maybe it is ultimately a budget item, obviously, we're not gonna go buy some robot or something, maybe you can, I don't know. And having seen firsthand with parks, the amount of work that goes into this grant writing and that sort of thing, it seems like that might be a really logical thing, because we talked a lot about where there might be grants on some of these. But if you don't have the time and the personnel and the expertise to write grants, then, we're probably giving up some money on that, so.
I don't disagree.
Heather, do you know, in municipal grant writing, can a grant writer be partially compensated by the administrative segment of the grant? In the private sector, it can be. My daughter even writes grants in the dance industry, and part of that administrative part can be paid to the grant writer. Can that happen in municipal grant process?
All the grants that I've been involved with, the only grant that I can think of that allows for, say, administration type costs is the Green Communities.
Okay. That's just for private industry, sometimes that's a selling point. We bring on a person on payroll for grant writing, and they can partially be paid out of the grants that they bring in.
It could be a budgetary line item that percentage gets paid out of, I believe.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I think the grant writer
agree,
should
and
get 10% of the grant, but I don't know why I think that.
Not if they're on a commission, though.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to have us discuss that as a commission, as a committee fully before we write our report for this year. And if the committee agrees, I think that should be a bullet point or a point made in our report that we either are all in agreement or to some extent, we feel that this is an important position that could really help finance projects and whatever. I don't know how it'd be worded, but maybe incorporate that in our report.
We don't know, maybe town manager will be coming forward with that anyways.
We'll have to wait and see.
Big surprise.
And I understand that, Heather is tasked as the procurement officer, and a lot of the grants that we've gotten she's written, but as Mr. Menard just said, and I know where he's coming from, with the amount of work, the Parkland grant that Parks just got, and they were talking last night about the next 3 grants that are coming up. They are time intensive to get everything in to the grant application and get it in on time, because there's so much that's got to be pulled together, narratives and all kinds of things. But if you have somebody that does that day in and day out, and I know a couple of people that do it in the private sector, and it's a lot of work, and she just, when she's coming up on a deadline, that's it. Nothing else in her life happens except writing that grant. And, but it brings in the money.
Personally, I enjoy writing grants and receiving the funds more. But there's obviously been no time, especially being
Yeah.
so
People that do it for a living, most of them, they really do enjoy it, but there's just a lot of crunch
Boring.
times. Yeah.
You may consider new hobbies.
Yeah, outside of the extra hours.
A new class in high school, grant writing.
Exactly.
And the other thing that I'll just comment on, after being on multiple boards over the past few years, and again, Parks, one of them, and even the Green Communities applications for the streetlights and so on and so forth. With somebody doing the grant that knows the process, it goes much smoother, there's less errors, there's less corrections, less kickback from whoever you're applying to, that, we need clarification of this, that, and the other thing. It's just a smoother process, and it doesn't necessarily cost a lot more than going through it the way we're doing it right now.
More efficient.
My opinion, again.
There was one other thing that, Chris, you brought up about the bridge culvert. That's a grant that I did submit for and we received for a bridge and culvert inventory, basically the same as our pavement management plan, so that we're heading in that direction. So we'll eventually have those planning figures as far as what work from the infrastructure piece. There's a lot more to it than just that.
When do we anticipate that one?
We have not contracted, we have the estimate and the selected vendor, which will be doing the work, but I don't have an estimate at this point.
Do we think that might be complete this calendar year, or?
I would think this calendar year is achievable.
Okay.
We would like to time it in time for the next capital plan.
Great.
My turn. So the capital planning committee brought forward 35 requests. How many more do we have after that were not brought forward, that were put through over the years, or is that the current sum that we have? I know you have the kind of distribution over the next 10 years, but.
How many in total for the 10 years? I
Correct.
do not have that, but the spreadsheet is up online. So
Are we talking in the dozens, or are we talking in like the
Hundreds.
Hundreds? Okay. So the next question I have is, we have, actually, first I want to ask, for the project number, do they follow the fiscal year, or do they follow the calendar year?
the year that they're submitted, that's what the project number
But
is.
the calendar year that they're submitted?
Calendar year.
Okay, so where it says, for example, IT 24, that is fiscal year 2023, but calendar year 24, so that's the most recent submission. Or are there any or are there any
It's got to be
25s?
the fiscal year, because we have 24s.
Sorry, fiscal. Yeah.
Fiscal
Yes,
year.
fiscal year.
Okay.
So 24 would be, they were submitted this fall.
Okay, so on the list, we have two, it looks like, in the top 10 that were submitted this year. We have one that's from the fiscal year of 2016. How far back are we going with some of these that are not on the 35 list? I mean, are we going back, we're closing in on 10 years now for some of these.
16 might be the earliest
Okay.
that I see. It's not something I looked at specifically when putting this together. 16 looks the earliest for fiscal '25.
Okay. I guess my question there is just, when you're building out your 5-year and your 10-year forecast and you're seeing things kind of trickle down, if we're getting, well, actually, first, before that, how many actual submissions were put forward in FY '24 in total? And can we use that as sort of a benchmark to predict out how many additional requests we're going to get per year, so that we don't have that kind of dwindle down where we actually see that we're in the black after 5 years, when we should be still buried in the red?
I'd have to look at the system because it's broken out by department. So the
Okay.
numbering system
Okay.
starts, 1 through however many requests they submitted that fiscal year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's broken up by department. So it's not sequential from like DPW to schools for the total number.
Mm-hmm.
It's, if school had 3 requests this year, they would have 3 project numbers that are 1, 2, 3. Same with DPW would be the fiscal year and 1, 2, 3. The differentiation is the beginning part that identifies the department. So if it's PD, fire department is FD, so on.
A lot of the big items are kind of planned out pretty well for 10 years, though, right? Like
Turkey Hill.
vehicles and those sorts of things.
Fire apparatus.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Even
those were
DPW has.
covered, yes. Yeah, that's correct.
So I guess my kind of
Cruisers go out
Cruisers,
10
yeah,
years. Fire apparatus goes out 10 years. And this followed, prior to doing even the submission, there was an update of the inventory, the vehicles and equipment,
Mm-hmm.
and assets, including buildings. So those were, the departments have those up to date, and they use those as a baseline too for putting their capital plan together.
Okay. I guess my main concern is that looking at the 10-year projection is giving sort of a false sense of security, in my opinion.
Well, that's why I brought up it's a snapshot in time, and
Okay.
that in future years, you're going to see a drop-off of
Mm-hmm.
totals, because we approach those, things, and things do come up
Mm-hmm.
in real time.
Okay.
And I think that is one of the things that the capital planning committee wants to start to look at in this winter, is that how do we account for those kind of unknowns through this budget as well?
I mean, you could just take if we have requests going back to 2016 and we have $40 million in capital, that's $5 million a year, as a very basic number. Now, that's not obviously what we're getting for requests every year, but if you take
Yeah.
that over the average of the length of years.
Right, perhaps that's a way, like we talked about infrastructure, we're only maybe seeing things that are like 3 years out because that's what has occurred. But maybe we look at trends on those and we say that's naturally the trend that we're seeing, so that maybe we don't know what's going to fail in 5 years.
Right.
But we should at least budget for something for 5 through 10.
I would be curious to see even just graphical trend lines, to see what each department has kind of requested over the years, and kind of see, has it been plateauing? Has it been skyrocketing? Can we get a predictor
I
out
think
of?
Chris can do that.
Sounds like a good idea.
The 2016 one was the ADA.
The ADA
school.
study, right.
I think was probably based on the Veritex, or one of those reports from way back when, and they're just getting to that because there was a ton of it on there, so I think, and then, of course, then we add all the other stuff we added to it. But most of them seem fairly new. I think if they don't get done in the first couple of years, maybe they do something else, or maybe that becomes less a priority, or maybe there's a good reason why it didn't get funded the first 3 or 4 years.
Do we have a process by which we remove outdated requests from the list,
No,
or do we have to have
their
the capital plan look at
departments-
hundreds?
Opinions of their priorities to run their department.
Okay, I just wonder if it makes sense for capital planning to kind of send a report back to each department at the end of the year and say, here's your outstanding capital requests.
We talked a bit about that, like, if we make a decision on like Brooks House, I mean, there's well over $250,000 worth of repairs to Brooks House. That makes no sense to me. Like,
Right.
let's decide on what to do with that thing and move it, burn it down, or whatever it is, and,
Those are the decisions that are,
Bonfire.
Yeah.
like I said, critical
2026.
to impacting our capital
If that
planning.
thing
Right,
burns down,
right.
everyone's gonna blame me, but.
Getting back to your grant writing. Yes. Not about burning down, but.
You said you wanted to retire. Here you go. Here's your opportunity.
The plan doesn't take into account grant funds
Okay.
for any of these projects. So we've received a lot of grant money, in particular for bridges, culverts. So that's something that's not included in the sources. We do request when people submit, if that's one of the categories they filled out, is if grant funds are available. But there's, I think, a whole process that needs to accompany that is, let's do the preliminary work, plan to apply for that grant so we can plan in our capital plan those funds in that year. And then we'll adjust accordingly.
Heather, I'm assuming that you've got a document that retains all that data as to what we've funded with grant money. Kind of like a number of years ago when we had one of the members of this committee trying to quantify the amount of money coming into is more or less the library system than anything, with the Friends of the Library and all of that, that at some point could potentially become needed to be funded by the town's budget. Is there a similar comparison to what we got grant money to offset what would have come out of the budget? I'm not asking for it, I'm just
I
wondering
can
if
tell
we're
you what
tracking it.
we've included is departments usually include in their presentation sometimes other sources of funding for their budgets. And at the annual town meeting in my presentation, I've also included pages of grant funds that supplement the budgets as well. So it shows, these are also sources that the taxpayers have to fund, but in some
Okay,
way are
I'll ask the
funded, not
question
local
and-
tax dollars.
Yeah, I'll
I
ask
don't
the-
have it in one location as far as multiple years.
I'm sorry?
Multiple years I wouldn't have in one location. That could be an accounting type report. That
Yeah,
maybe
okay.
can-
I was going to ask the question in a different way, and that pretty much answers the question. If we requested a spreadsheet of historical spreadsheet of grants granted to offset expenses in the town over the past 10 years, there would be some work behind getting that.
Yes.
It kind of compares to a data sheet that gives you tracking on our fleet operations in town. It's the same, type of a report. We don't have a way to generate it quickly. We have to pull
That's
information from
an
different.
accounting question. I don't know by category in the general ledger, like if it's coded, grants are coded differently than other special revenue
Yeah, okay.
funds.
It's a week 3 question for the new finance director.
Yes. Yeah.
Who's probably watching?
He's already rescinding his. That actually, the borrowing numbers for the school, are those going to be MSBA? Are we going to be able to, in theory, use MSBA?
Believe those assume MSBA
Okay.
funding.
For MSBA, you have to put up 100% of the funds and then you get reimbursed 50% of the funds, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so these numbers that we're seeing for the school at about 20 million would, in theory, if it's perfect math, come out to about 10 million that we would actually be on the hook for.
Right. Depending on, it's around 50% usually, if not 52%, I think.
Okay. But we have to appropriate the funds at 100% first.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Heather, do you know the reimbursement rates presently on other projects in other cities and towns in Mass? Are they still fairly substantial like we had for the middle high school? we were in the 50-some odd % range, weren't we, or higher?
Right. I have not heard, is Brian still on? Maybe he can
He is still on.
answer that question. Maybe
can't
it's something
guarantee
that's
he's
come up
awake.
during their meetings.
Yeah.
There he is.
Not sure I feel comfortable answering that one.
I understand, Brian.
All right, are there any other questions or comments for the town manager?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to committee reorganization. So we have 3, in theory, positions that are open and available for anybody and everybody to take. We have the chair, the vice chair, and we currently have an open position of the clerk. So in just wanting to at least make sure that we are reorganizing on at least a relatively yearly basis, so that we don't have somebody just always in charge, I wanted to at least open it up to the committee to discuss whether or not anybody was interested in any of the positions, had questions about any of the positions, and then we could go through and actually do nominations and voting.
So I am interested in the clerk position, and I've asked a fair amount of questions, which I've had all answered, so I am interested in that position.
All right. Is anybody else interested in the clerk position? I'm happy to have a vote on this one right away, before anyone changes their mind. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I nominate Tiffany
Tavares.
Tavares, there we go, as the clerk for the Finance Committee for the next whatever term.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? We are unanimous. Congratulations, Tiffany. We are
Thank you.
having a clerk.
Thank you.
Would you like to write down that you're the clerk?
I'm going to actually get a sticker when I leave here.
So just might as well move right on to chair as well. I've enjoyed certainly serving as the chair. It was a very steep learning curve. I'm happy to give up the chairship. I'm happy to maintain the chairship. I am open to the committee for whatever they would prefer. If there's anybody that would be interested in it, I'm happy to share the time.
Yeah, I'm fine with remaining vice chair, but I do not think I have the ability to be chair with my
It's fine.
travel.
You can just set the meetings whenever you want to then. You can set them from Dubai.
3 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly.
Eastern time. I agree with what the chair just said. The learning curve, being chair of this committee, it needs to be steep, especially in the first year, if you haven't been, sitting on the committee for 5 years already. And I personally feel that Evan's done a great job, and I would move that we nominate Evan for chair for this next term.
Second.
Any discussion? Nobody else wants it? Sure. Do we want to lump, we might as well just do both at the same time. Is anybody else interested in vice chair, or would there be a motion for Chris as well?
I recommend we nominate Chris as vice chair.
Second.
All right, so the vote will be for Chris to remain vice chair and for myself to remain chair. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? All right, we are unanimous. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see how this goes.
As
Another
I
budget
said, I
season.
think consistency for, a few years. As you people know, I'm not in this for the long term.
You keep
I'm
saying
back. And now that we got a full committee, I could potentially step back and wait for one more to step in, but we'll leave that alone. I'm not leaving yet. But I think, 2 to 3 years minimum with consistency in this committee is a good thing, unless the committee feels otherwise in any one given year.
All right.
Did we have unfilled other?
Oh, so I put a spreadsheet together, I don't know, 20 minutes before I left work this evening, because I was working all evening. for all day. I don't know who's doing which liaisonships at this point, so my plan was just to kind of redo them all, talk about which ones we want to do. I even have some on my list that aren't technically usually covered as a liaison, but I could see maybe some financial impact. And then post this on our SharePoint, so we all have access to it as kind of a living document, so we can refer to it and update it as needed. The ones that I currently have that I could remember are myself on the Board of Health. Not that they really have anything ever that gets reported, but I serve on it, so might as well. Chris on the Capital Planning, Dave on Green Communities, myself on the Master Plan Steering Committee, and Tom on the Municipal Building Design Committee. And the reason for at least the last 4 is because we've all been appointed to those committees and commissions. Or committees and boards, I guess. Nope, committees. So those, as far as I recall, are technically locked in for a certain amount of time. And I looked on the website and I couldn't actually find any expiration dates for any of them whatsoever. So I'm gonna have to actually go back and check to see when the expiration dates are.
So I think the only one that is officially an expiration date is capital planning.
So.
And that's at 3 years.
I think that's correct. The Building Design Committee, or whatever you want to call it, that's for the duration of the committee, I believe.
So you
Or
are,
changed by the committee as a whole through agreement by the vote of the committee.
okay. So
I
Chris
would
is,
say that, I just want to bring this out right up front, that I have a strong desire to be the liaison to DPW. I've developed a good relationship with Mr. Bernard, and I would really be strongly interested in that one.
does anybody else have any requests for DPW? I don't think this requires a vote or anything, since it's just liaisons. I don't think there's anything formal to it, so I think maybe what we'll do is just do a general vote at the end, once we kind of organize them all, and just do an up or down at that point. So Dave, I have you for DPW.
And Green Communities.
And Green Communities, correct. Chris, you are capital planning until, it's the one I didn't check on the website.
And then I have parks as well. I've been
You do, correct.
coordinating with
I-
Anna quite frequently.
I had a feeling you were going to stay on there, just, these were the ones that I knew were at least appointed. And I think the Master Plan Steering Committee is a 3-year position. I think that one is also, I'll have to go back to the original meeting, but I'm pretty sure that was also a 3-year commitment. So I'll double check with that one, but that would be, that was from, that would be 26 as well. So we don't typically have anyone on the Agricultural Commission. I don't necessarily think there's a reason to have someone in the Agricultural Commission. They do have some funds that come through with but they don't actually have a budget that they work with. It's more just bringing income into the town through permits and whatnot. But if anyone is interested, I'm happy to put a liaison for the Agricultural Commission. I'm also just as happy to check in with, I think Jen Duffy runs it. Or whenever I'm down at low places getting hay, I can just talk to Mary Ray and find out what's going on.
Yeah, I don't think we really need one
Perfect. One down.
personally.
I think that's a good choice for the time being with Agricultural Commission. The only thing that might change that going forward is if they ever do move forward with actually owning and managing land in town, then it would be important to have a little bit of review of what they're doing and advise on that. Heather, Agricultural Commission does have a small amount of funds on the line item, don't they? Yeah, okay. But it's a small amount.
I think it's less than the Board of Health.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So Board of Health, again, there's no real reason to have that on there, but I'll just bring anything forward that we get. Unless anybody really wants to come to our meetings, they're every other Monday over at the Ritter. Very short meetings. I think our shortest one was 4 minutes.
Yeah.
You can't watch them on,
Nope, they're not recorded.
No.
At least not until, George does not like them recorded, as far as I can tell. He likes our minutes, and they're literally 4 minutes long. It's great. Capital Planning Committee is an appointed position. So I was just in the spirit of kind of doing DPW and facilities and all that together. I put Cemetery Commission. There is a budget, there's certainly a line item for the Cemetery Commission, but that's usually working out of a different type of account. It's not our usual, it's not directly out of the omnibus budget. Right. So we could lump it into that as well, if you would
Right,
like to.
And their other account that they work out of is the
The sale of cemetery plots.
sale of cemetery plots, and it's just the interest earned on those, on
Right.
that money, and that's controlled by the commission.
Right.
So we wouldn't have I mean, we could make some recommendations, but they solely control that money.
Yeah, I'm inclined to do the same with the AgCom and just kind of say there's no real reason, at least from a financial committee standpoint, to have a liaison on this for the Cemetery Commission.
And I think I agree with you also in that cemetery and including sewer commission, that anything that we might comment on would be through the DPW director in regards to those committees or departments.
Agreed. Okay. Council on Aging. We have had historically a liaison for the Council on Aging. But I don't believe we had a report from the Council on Aging in 6 months, if not longer.
I think they meet at like 6 AM or something. They're definitely during the day.
Are they?
Yeah.
I'm too young for that.
Do you want to continue doing that one, Jay? Okay. Excellent.
Thank you.
So for DPW, we have Dave. Facilities, that'll be the other big one. Anybody have a nice relationship with Chris? I think I've met him once.
Yeah. I have that relationship, but I don't want to take on a dozen responsibilities like I did before, but
So
if absolutely nobody else wants it, that would be fine, but.
I guess I probably should have prefaced all of this with, it ranges from, for example, the school committee, it's usually a good idea to watch the meetings and have and be in contact with Carol Archambault or Brian, the vice chair, because there is quite a bit going on and they're meeting very frequently, and it is the largest part of our budget as a town. With some of these other ones, I was the liaison for fire and for police when I first started, and I would send an email to the chiefs once every 2 weeks and just say, hey, anything new? And they would say no, and I would say great, and that would be the end of it. So it sort of depends upon what you're looking to get out of it. But it could be as simple as sending off a letter to Chris Ruth and just saying, what are the updates for the past month or something to that effect.
I have a lot of experience with facilities and a good understanding of the operations of it. I'm not very sure of what the commitment and the responsibilities entail. Like, I understand you just said it could be an email exchange here and there, but how much do you actually have to dig into that position?
With facilities, probably not all that much.
It's a communications link. Is
Right.
basically what it is.
Exactly.
You check in with him or he checks in with you, especially if he has an unexpected issue that's going to affect the town financially, then the normal route would be from him through you or the town manager to us. But if he has a good relationship with his liaison, then it would come through the liaison to us, and then Heather would fill in the details of the situation. I think I mentioned it a couple times ago when we were together, that liaisons are not there to be a part of the meeting. Sometimes we are invited to be part of the discussion, but most times you're not. You're there to observe, report back to the finance committee, and bring information in both directions at the request of either committee, if that makes sense.
That's very helpful, thank you. I don't think that's going to be an overwhelming amount of work, in addition to what I've already signed up for in my life. So I would have interested in being the facilities liaison, although I've not met Chris. That would be really nice to meet him and build that relationship and potentially talk shop.
Sure. It's all yours. Done. Moving on.
Great personality. I saw him this evening for a serious family event that happened this evening. And when I got to him, I said, "Do I know you?" He said, "Well, you should. You're in my office 3 days a week." But Chris and I have a great relationship too. And
Looking forward to meeting him.
yep.
Next up alphabetically is fire department, and we could probably lump it in with police department as well.
We usually do, yeah.
Would make sense since they're in the same building and they run pretty much off of the same operation. Anyone have any interest in fire and police? The chiefs are very nice. They do have donuts. They'll actually invite you over for coffee.
What happens if you bring them donuts?
I don't know. I've never brought them donuts, but they did actually have me over for coffee one morning. It was lovely.
I think the chief's still doing coffee with the chief, if I remember correctly.
Are they? Yeah. I know they stopped for COVID, but it's good that
Yeah,
they're starting
I
up
think
again.
it's back up and running again.
Coffee roasters,
Any interest at all?
9 o'clock in the morning.
Should we draw straws?
That liaison it's definitely not a lot of work, but it's an important one because, if we have a fire truck go down, that information, again, with a good relationship with the department head, comes to this committee through them, and then if Heather will pass it on if it hasn't gotten to us already. But when major events happen within those departments, it tends to be a substantial dollar amount effect, and affects the ability of the safety division of the town to function.
Plus, from the police standpoint, I think it's a good way to kind of get some of the bang for your buck knowledge and information passed forward outside of the yearly reports that they give at our meetings and the select board meetings.
I'll do police and fire.
Okay, great. That moves us on to library. Mr. Muir. That one's another pretty easy one as well.
I can do the library.
Okay. So Master Plan Steering Committee is myself. Municipal Building Design Committee. I don't believe that gets, do you have any idea when that gets redone? Or is it yours for life, which is fine?
Well, I'm still on the committee, so we're on hold now, waiting for the numbers to come in, I guess.
Okay.
I would recommend consistency, though.
I fully support that. I support a lifetime.
And that's basically
Without
what those
parole.
terms are.
Exactly.
There's only two ways to get off the committee. The committee's dissolved, or you resign.
Yep. All right, so we'll leave Tom on MPDC. Parks, I see no reason to remove the spouse of a Parks Commissioner, at least in my opinion.
I need to make this comment, and it's nothing against Chris or anything like that either, and I will not fight having him stay in that position, but it can come to question with his relationship to a member of the committee. I'll just state it that way. I know when the select board makes appointments on committees, they've had a couple of those happen in the last couple of years. There was a husband spouse that wanted to be on the same committee, and they refused to do it. This is a liaison, so you're not seated on the committee, but I just bring that up as a, possibly in somebody's eyes, an implied conflict of interest.
I could see how that could be conceived that way. In my experience, what's it?
Parks is part of facilities.
True.
Yeah, it is actually.
Yeah, I don't think you view it that way, though. Parks is a commission. I think it's really important for us to be with the commissions more so than even the departments.
They're having their own separate discussions about things, and it's obviously could have a financial impact.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to bring up subjects. You're not, this is a thing that's coming up. So that's what we need to know. Then we can make our own decisions on how we feel about it.
Right. Yeah, I can see how a conflict of interest could be argued. At least from my experience, I've been approached more by Anna than by Chris for anything that's coming through Parks. I would support Chris, at least in terms of, he's, as far as I can tell, he's sort of just reported exactly what's gone on and has received a text message when he's been wrong, immediately correcting it. So I personally don't think that there's a conflict of interest with it, because again, it is just a liaison role. But if there's anyone else that is interested in it, I'm happy to have that discussion as well.
The only comment I'll make is what Jay said, and that is that as much as Parks wants to be discussed separately from facilities, the fact of the matter is they are part of facilities. It's the same as the cemetery department being part of DPW and sewer department being part of DPW. I guess I'll leave it at that. My position would be that it comes under facilities, but I'm not gonna, we're not voting on this anyway, but unless there's a consensus within the rest of the members that it goes with the liaison to facilities, I won't push it.
I can see your point, and it's the same thing with, facilities, landscaping, snow removal, they all kind of hold hands together, and they work together, and, there's partnership there. I don't have enough knowledge of, parks in general versus, different facilities, functions outside of parks, and the time for both of them. So I feel like it's not appropriate for me to weigh in yet on, if they require separate liaisons or if it should all fall under, one house. If it were to fall under one house, it would make sense to me. But keeping them separate, I think, depends on the workload and demand and the communication, which I don't know enough about.
And the way it was originally created was the fact that I was on Parks for a full term plus, I believe. So I was on finance, I was seated on Parks as an elected official, so I became a liaison from Parks. But that was before the facilities department was created.
Okay. I think it would make sense in both situations. I think there's an argument for both.
Yeah, before Parks was under DPW and we still had Parks. I'm more interested in what the elected bodies have to say than the departments, to be honest with you. I think that's why schools is important, because you're going to the school committee meetings and you're hearing what the school committee is saying and what they're looking at for policy going forward. The day-to-day activities that facilities carries out, that doesn't affect us that much, and we can get almost all of that through town manager's reports. So I think the alignment with the, those committees and commissions that have financial policy kind of drivers is the ones we should be focusing on. Even like library, I think it's, it's the, it's more important to keep up with what the library trustees is doing more so than Muir's day-to-day operations. We'll hear about those in his budget requests and his capital requests and that sort of thing, so.
For this one, I think what we should probably do is leave it out of the general vote, since it does sound like there's at least more of a discussion to have, rather than we just have a full up-down for it. So I'll just leave it sort of not filled in at this point. We'll finish up the rest of them, and then we can circle back to it, unless there's any other ones that we come to as well, if that works. All right, so police is taken care of. All right, the big one. Who gets to do school committee?
But I was assuming you were staying with it.
No.
I need to bow out of this conversation for a minute.
If you're not here, you can't say no. That's how I always run. So school committee is probably the largest time commitment out of all of these, because I think it is worth watching their meetings. They are very informative meetings, and they tend to be relatively lengthy meetings. Like 2 to 3 plus hours long. I think you probably could get by with sending out notes to, sending out notes to Carol or to Brian or to Dr. Burnham as well, and get at least an update from a financial standpoint. But I think you'd miss a decent amount of the nuanced information that comes out that still does have an impact on the overall budget and where they're kind of heading towards with their spending. So yeah, it kind of comes down to who has an extra 2 to 3 hours a week that they can devote to watching another meeting.
I cannot.
What's Brendan doing?
Yeah, I know, right?
Anybody interested? By default, it falls on me.
I don't think by default it falls on you.
Okay. All right,
Who was doing it? Were you doing
me. And I've been doing a terrible job because I haven't had time on Wednesdays.
it? What?
Wednesdays, I have 2 kids in gymnastics and one kid at Boy Scouts all at the same time, so.
I will say this year, I think it is a pretty important one, because they're talking on things like eliminating 20 positions in the schools, so this is one we need to keep abreast of.
Yep.
Is this, does it have the potential to be a shared position with another person?
All of this is, I
Oh,
mean,
of
all
course.
we're doing is just kind of reporting out on what is going on with that commission and with that entity.
So what if I propose to be like a co-liaison with Evan and split the responsibility of
Yeah,
being that person with you?
Yeah, that's,
I'll split it.
I'm happy to divide it by 7. If we really want. We can each go to one meeting every 2 months.
Yeah, I think we could figure something out.
Sure.
To try to organize the communication back and forth. But I'll do that as long as I have a partner.
Yeah, I think that would be sufficient.
you don't need to go to the meeting either, you can just watch the meeting. on
Everything's
TV.
recorded, so you can
Yeah,
pick it up on YouTube.
I've just
Fabulous for
recently
falling asleep at night.
signed up for a lot, so, I just want to, I don't want to overpromise and undersell in any event. I want to be aware of what I'm doing and be able to deliver.
You cannot do any worse than I have done. I have not seen a school committee meeting in, Brian, please don't pass this on, in like 2 months.
Okay,
So you can't do any worse than me.
we'll share.
They're in a collective bargaining cycle also, aren't they? Or just beginning it, I believe. The Teachers Association.
I actually have Dr. Burnham's 96 slide presentation that I was looking over while I was also at work. It was very helpful. It was very informative. They are in, I can actually tell you exactly who. So they have a bargaining unit contract coming up with the Lunenburg Education Association and the Lunenburg Paraprofessionals Union. And they have non-bargaining unit contracts coming up for multiple employee contracts are up for contract renewal starting on July 1st, 2023, and unaffiliated salary schedule adjustment, plus out-of-district tuition costs increasing. So, that was a different one. So yes, they have 2 unions that they are going into negotiations with. So that would be another good one to keep on top of. You wouldn't be able to actually attend their negotiation conversations because that's all in executive session, but we can at least hear about the process after the fact.
Okay.
And it never fails that In the most difficult budget years, there's always at least 2 units they're negotiating with for the contract, so you get a double whammy there. You're got a couple unions coming after more money, and on the other side, you're cutting positions.
Yep. All right, so Ms. Tavares and I can take on school committee, and I think between the two of us, we can get at least a half a liaison out of it. The select board. We haven't generally had a liaison to the select board, to my knowledge. I've typically relied just on the town manager as that kind of liaison role. But given that the town manager works for the select board, I wasn't sure. I wanted to at least bring it to the committee to say, do we actually want to put forward a liaison for the select board? They technically have one for us. Do we want to do the same for them?
Sounds fair.
Anybody down the line interested?
Can I bring my assistant?
I'll do it.
You wanna do it?
'cause
Okay.
I usually watch them.
Do you?
Yeah,
I've watched fewer of those than I've watched of the school committee, so.
usually more for entertainment value. Now I have to take
Yes,
notes.
the trick with the select board meetings is watch as long as you can stay awake.
Say those
and then
ones,
Look on YouTube a day or two later and skip through the sections that put you to sleep.
those ones tend to run longer than the school committee
Yeah.
meetings, so,
Yeah.
and they're weekly. Thank you. We'll get you a coffee subscription. Last one I have is sewer, which we've typically had that one's broken out in the same way that we've had parks broken out as well, so.
I'd like to cover that as part of my responsibilities for DPW, because Bill and I have conversations about their operations also. And it's this year especially, or the next 2 years, it's going to tie in with my conversations with him with Green Communities. So I'm going to be involved in a lot of that already.
Okay. Jay, does that work for you? You've historically been, you okay not being a liaison for that?
Jay, unless you want that piece of it. I mean, you're actually more qualified for it than I am. So I'm very willing to defer.
Doesn't matter to me. I can stay with it, or he can take it.
Rock, paper, scissors, or co-liaisons?
Yeah, we can do that too.
That's fine.
Yeah, we can do that too.
All right, co-liaisons, done.
It will give me the opportunity to draw from his expertise with questions. That'll work fine.
So I've got a couple other ones that I've just thrown on here that do technically have some sort of a financial impact, and that one of them being the 300th anniversary committee. They currently have a small pot of money to do stuff with, and it's going to be increasing as they go along, but it's not directly out of the omnibus budget, or it's not, well, it is, but it's one line item. So I'm fine without having anybody do that one. We could certainly just get an information when we get information from them at the town meeting. If anybody wanted to be a liaison, I just wanted to throw that one out there. Perfect. So APDC was the next one, and that one again is similar to, in my mind, kind of AgCom, where there is a budget for it, but is it really a financial impact that we would need to kind of at least keep an eye on or discuss? And the APDC is the Architectural Preservation District, something or other, committee. They are within 1 mile of 1 mile, I think, of the town center in radius.
Roughly, yeah. Quick scenario analysis. When APDC brings warrant articles to the town meeting, don't we usually traditionally end up with no financial?
Correct. Every single
So,
time.
Based on that, I think, any one of us that follows a lot of meetings in town, if there's something earth-shattering that
Yep.
needs to be passed on, I think we will.
Yep.
But I don't think we need a formal liaison.
Perfect. Couldn't have said it better myself. Done. Conservation Commission. You mentioned when Agriculture Commission owns land, Conservation Commission does own land.
But their money does not come out of the budget.
Correct,
They generate their own revenue.
correct. So it's kind of the other side of it.
Money out of facilities, don't they?
Yep.
They take money out of facilities for their house. They've been doing work on their house.
Now, that comes out of conservation money. The house up on, was it Pleasant Street or wherever that road, that building
Hollis
is?
Hills.
Hmm?
Hollis Hills, isn't it?
Hollis Hills, yeah. I believe that comes out of their revenues. Because they own that, Conservation
the
Commission owns
facilities-
that building, and they lease it.
Chris from Facilities has been involved in projects over at that house. So I would ask him where that money's coming from.
Okay.
'Cause I watch quite a bit of conservation.
Yeah. Okay.
I will ask Chris.
I know they,
As the new facilities lead.
There you go. It's a great question to ask. Jay, having watched a bunch of the Conservation Commission meetings, do you think it's worth having liaison for it?
I don't know if they need a liaison. I mean,
Okay.
I watched their meetings, 'cause I'm interested in a lot of the stuff they're talking about.
But it's usually has nothing to do.
Mostly- Yeah, it's mostly land
Right.
issues, wetlands issues.
Okay, perfect. So nothing for that one as well.
So we are or we are not?
I don't see a reason to, and like,
Okay. And Tiffany has just volunteered to get an answer to that one question as to where
Exactly.
that funding's coming from.
yep.
It would just be good to know.
Cultural Council, again, they have a teeny tiny budget, but they are at least responsible for trying to bring culture to our town.
Yeah, and again, that's state grant funded, isn't it?
Probably.
I believe so.
Perfect. I like this. I like being able to delete these.
They did get some ARPA money, but I think most of their operations and the grants that they give out is money that comes in through the state cultural something or another.
Personnel Committee, I don't think there's a reason to have a Personnel Committee liaison personally, but they at least do some work.
Yeah, and what they
have
do
a
do.
comp study going on.
Right.
They're supposed to have, or trying to have something for a warrant.
So do we want to have that kind of put forward, or, I mean, I imagine most of their meetings would be in an executive session. They're not?
No, but they're not all recorded either when they in person.
Okay. Is there an interest from the committee to have at least a quasi liaison for them?
I can do that, but my wife is on them.
Fantastic.
That's the reason I know this stuff.
Should I bite my tongue?
You want to make a comment?
PAC is the next one. They are a line item, budget item. They do get a lot of their funding from Comcast as well. We could always literally just ask them when we're in our meeting if there's anything, but they are an itemized entity in the town, so I wasn't sure if, and there was I don't think there's a real need for one, but figured I would throw it out there at least. Hearing none, off it goes. And the last one is the Trust Fund Commission, which I'm going to read the blurb that's on the website first, and then we can decide. So this is what's on the Trust Fund Commission's little website or webpage. The Board of Commissioners of Trust Funds shall have the management of all trust funds given or bequeathed for the benefit of the town or the residents unless the donor in making the gift or bequest shall make some other provision for the management of the fund. The board shall, consistent with the terms of the trusts, manage and control said trusts and distribute the income in accordance with the trusts. To me, that sounded like we probably should have at least communication with them,
I agree.
especially since we're asking for a whole bunch of information from them. Because they are the ones that actually have all the information on all the funds that we have in the different trusts and what we can do with it and how we can invest it.
I don't I think there's only certain trusts, like scholarship funds and stuff, that they actually.
I know it's not all of them, but I was under the impression that it was more than we think it is.
Is there an actual committee?
There is, there's 3 people on it. I'll see Corrine this weekend at the Lions Club. I can always ask Corrine. She's on the committee.
Yeah, I don't see a huge need for it. I don't think it's going to drive anything
Okay.
substantially, but if anyone wants to report out on what they're doing, that's fine too.
Okay. All right, so that takes us to the end of that. So with the exception of parks at this point, unless,
And personnel.
yeah, okay. You want to lump them together?
If you guys want to lump it together and not get information.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So, well, because we would be doing the same thing. If we're saying that Chris shouldn't be on parks, the parks liaison, because his spouse is a commissioner, a parks commissioner, then we would have to kind of say the same thing about Jay.
Can we go down the line and get feeling, because I'd
Sure.
like to go right down the table.
Okay. Mr. Passios?
I did bring the question up. I do feel fairly strongly about it, but I will not fight it adamantly. I'll leave it at that.
Ms. Tavares?
I have not been on this committee long enough to have formed an opinion, so I plead the fifth.
You can abstain.
Okay.
Ms. Russell?
You know, we're short all with that.
Okay.
I agree with that. I don't see any issue. It's a small enough town. We all know somebody on all the committees, so, and this is more of a situation where we're providing information about what's going on in the committee, not, obviously, they can make recommendations or make comments on it, but I don't think I think the ultimate goal is just to find out what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Simeoni?
I kind of feel pretty much the same way. It's not like to be an appointed committee. It's a liaison. It's information gathering. It's communication. Most of the meetings, I said, are on YouTube. I think everybody should be watching at least some portion of the meeting, informing yourself about, what's going on. Everybody has different interests, but there's no, with the meetings being on, you can look at anything you want at any time. There's nothing being hidden, so.
Okay. Mr. Menard?
Feel the same way as Jay and Tom.
I tend to feel the exact same. It is a small town, and it's, as I see these positions, they're effectively one-way discussions, where we are either quoting people directly or just simply bringing information to this direction, towards this committee. It's not meant to necessarily be a dialogue going back the other way, or influence of any kind. So I feel the same. I don't see it as a conflict of interest in this position. I would see it more of a conflict of interest if it was an appointed position, or an elected position, or 2 people serving on the same committee.
Which we have tons of in town.
Do we?
Yep.
Tons of what?
Spouses on the same commission. Council on Aging, 300th anniversary. I mean, there's many.
It's tough to get 120 people in
I
town that are.
respectfully submit that that's a different situation, but again,
Just a-
I withdraw my
Just a fact.
objection. Let's put it that way.
All right.
I'll also say that anyone is free on this commission to reach out to the chair or any member of any other committee at any given time for any information.
Absolutely. And it's basically anything that's like affecting the budget. It's
Mhm.
financial
Yeah.
issues.
Agreed. Okay. So what I'm gathering from the committee is that we are for the most part, comfortable with Chris remaining as the liaison for parks and with Jay being liaison for sewer, or continuing to be liaison for sewer.
No, it was personnel.
For personnel, excuse me, that's right. Thank you.
Does Joanna want to be on sewer?
Okay.
Be a good excuse for Joanne to get off.
All right. So as I have it listed, just to make sure I didn't mess it up, myself for Board of Health, Chris for Capital Plan, Jay for Council on Aging, Dave for DPW, Tiffany for Facilities, Jean for Fire, Dave for Green Communities, Tom for Library, myself for Master Plan Steering Committee, Tom for Municipal Building Design Committee, Chris for Parks, Jean for Police, myself and mostly Tiffany for School Committee, Tom for Select Board, why did it switch to PD? Jay and Dave for Sewer, and Jay for Personnel Committee. Anybody see a mistake? Fantastic. All of those, I don't think we even need a motion. Do we need, no? Yeah,
We typically don't.
no.
No.
But
Let's just go ahead with that. We're good.
Roll with it.
All right, so I will put this up on the SharePoint tomorrow, not tonight. All right, moving on to minutes. There's one set of minutes that are in the drive and were sent out by Danielle early this afternoon. Not sure if anybody had a chance to look at them. The only issue that I had was Tiffany's name was spelled incorrectly, but I've already made a mention of that. Did anybody else have a chance to read them?
Yes.
Yep.
Any issues with them besides that?
Comment I would make is I would like to see the members listed, chair, vice chair, clerk, and members. And then if there are people absent, they should be noted.
Okay.
We have guest speakers.
She listed chair, at least, but I agree.
I wasn't it, so.
So we don't, yeah, okay.
And there was no clerk, so I guess
But absent would be good.
Should be
absent would be good.
mentioned,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
And meeting location.
We taking attendance now?
Well, the minutes are.
Yeah, they're supposed, they should.
Minutes are the official record.
And location, yeah. Agreed. Okay, I can add both of those to it, and then I'll submit them. But does anybody want to make a motion with approving the minutes with 3 changes of location, absent members, and the correct spelling of Ms. Tavares' name?
And starting with chair, vice chair, and
He's saying
clerk.
the order.
Oh, I get to go first? Ooh. Got it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
I'm going to abstain just because I didn't watch the meeting.
6:01. Got it. All right. That brings us on to committee reports. Does anybody have any committee reports to report? Anything specific since last week?
Do not.
I'll just restate, Green Communities has a meeting coming up on the 29th. If the system works at the library, it will be on Zoom. So I'm hoping that the general public and anybody interested in that particular meeting, as I stated, Kelly Brown's going to be with us. I'm guessing she's going to be on Zoom, but I'm not sure. The last time we had a Zoom meeting there at the library, it was constantly in and out. So I will be very frustrated if that happens again on the 29th. One other just quick comment about Green Communities. I noticed that there will be a speaker at MMA this weekend in one of the workshops from Green Communities, state level.
Speaking of the MMA, have either of you guys, there's an app that they should give you once you're signed up, and you can actually choose your sessions. So I've already chosen my sessions and whatnot, so I would recommend it. It makes it a lot easier to get around.
I downloaded it and I haven't opened it since, so we'll
Oh,
see.
they have games and all sorts of stuff. You compete against everyone else. It's very engaging. Any other committee reports? I have none. All right, topics for future meetings. Anything we want to talk about before budget season starts in 2 weeks? 3 weeks.
as I said, I just want to be sure that when we get into the conversation about our report, the Finance Committee report, that we include, and my name and my brain just drew a total blank.
Oh, the
on what
grant
I asked
writing?
for earlier.
Grant writing positions? The grant writing position?
Yes, yes.
I would like to see some data that kind of goes along with that, a bang, you know, how much you're actually getting out of it versus the time that the town manager's putting into it herself. Is there the option for sort of, you know, splitting the cost across a number of different communities? Since I'm sure it's not a 40-hour-a-week position. Could you split it? You think so?
Some of the grants take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And then I think researching grants as well would be part of the position, so.
Chris, maybe we could get a synopsis from the person you're talking about as to, and it was discussed quite a bit last night at the Parks Commission meeting. There is a lot of time that's put into that. The caveat is that if you have somebody that does it all the time, that amount of time is compressed because they know what they're doing before they even start.
Mm-hmm.
I have to agree with the amount of time it takes to research the grants, never mind write them. And if that is put on the town manager with all the other hats that she seems to, you know, have to wear because of being short-staffed, I think some consideration to opening up some type of a budget for someone that's able to or capable, you know, of researching and writing those grants, it may benefit the town.
I can't see how there wouldn't be an ROI associated with it.
And one of the options might even be contracted services. I mean,
Sure.
that's not our decision to make, but I mean, that's another option that could be weighed versus putting somebody on payroll.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that also.
Okay. We can certainly add that to a future meeting. And that sounds like a discussion for a couple different other groups as well, town manager, personnel committee.
Well, I sort of think that when town manager presents the budget that has personnel and any new positions or not, that's the right time to have the discussion and then lead it into the report based on that.
Would you want to have that discussion at the time she's presenting her budget or prior to, so she has time to actually, you know, consider it?
Well, I think she's considering it. We've had, if we want to discuss it again, that's fine.
Well, she's hoping to get the 5-year financial forecast ready for February 8th, which is a week before she's supposed to give her preliminary budget. So in theory, we could throw it on that date, just to at least have a lengthier discussion on the benefits of having a full-time grant writer. I can throw it on there at least, because it's still very much in the air whether or not she's going to be able to get the 5-year financial forecast in that time with Ms. Brochu working so little. Okay, any other topics for upcoming meetings besides that?
I would just like to follow up on the discussion last week about getting financials from the school committee, not the day before the meeting.
We're going to discuss that in a little bit. Once we get to the upcoming meetings.
Did we get or put in the request for the numbers on the health insurance increase?
I did. I haven't heard anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I sent that request out a couple days ago. Haven't heard anything back with that. So we're scheduled to have our next meeting next week. I'm inclined to not have our next meeting next week, January 25th. That's our regularly scheduled meeting.
5th or 8th?
The 25th.
25th.
5th, okay.
This is technically an off-cycle meeting, which was put on by the town manager, so we could go over her capital plan. And was supposed to be for the financial forecast as well. But I don't think there's too much to actually discuss at this point.
Let's rest up for our
That's kind of my thought.
forthcoming season.
Does anybody really want to meet next week?
No, we're meeting pretty much every week after that.
Exactly.
So it makes sense.
February, we talked about this last time, February 8th would be our next one.
Correct. So we'd be looking at 3 weeks from today as our next meeting. All right, so I will, at this point, just plan to not put on an agenda unless something comes up between now and Tuesday. If something does, then we can get to there at that point. Let's see, so for February 8th, tentatively, we have the 5-year financial forecast from the town manager. She's very cautiously optimistic that that will be done at that point. Again, the new finance director will have been on the job for 3 days, so that's not very much time, and Karen's still trying to get other stuff done. But then we'll also talk about the grant writer position and anything else that comes up between then.
When does the governor's budget get?
She's a new governor, so.
No, she's
No, she's not a new governor this year, so it's true, that's a good question.
It's
We'll let you-
about- I thought the date was about a week after MMA. A week to 10 days after, because somebody mentioned the date in the last
Not a
10
big-
days that and I don't remember who I heard it from. But I'm pretty sure it was like 7 to 10 days after this weekend.
Yeah, well,
It's not a big deal.
yeah. Under the state constitution, the governor must, oh, it's the proposed one, yeah, well, I'm not sure. We'll probably find out this weekend.
Okay.
So we can send out a note. February 15th, we get the preliminary budget for the town manager, so that kicks off the official start of budget season. And then our budget season meetings are as follows. We have land use, council on aging, and library first. The next week, we have IT and police. The week after that, we have DPW and facilities. The week after that is supposed to be fire and public schools. Public schools is no longer going to be on the 14th. They are now going to be on the 21st. I did get correspondence back from the chair of the school committee, who has been in touch with the superintendent, and they are having they're really struggling with being able to get everything done in terms of positions, with ESSER funds falling out, with their 2 different negotiations going on, plus potentially a maximum of 10% increase to health insurance needs. So they are hoping to be able to have this all done by the 21st. But she has agreed that it has to be done by then because that's our last date that we have a meeting, so that's our last chance. But it's definitely not going to be on the 14th. And I'm very concerned that we're not going to be able to get any actual data very far in advance.
I agree, very much I agree.
Go ahead, Jay.
Their public meeting, public hearing.
Their public hearing?
No,
Our public hearing is the week after, the 28th. So we don't have a lot of time for that. I don't know if you said you didn't watch the meeting?
No, I
Last week.
did happen to watch the school committee meeting when
Our
they
meeting,
did.
our meeting.
I
from
did
last week.
not, no.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what we kind of agreed to was we were going to request supplemental information, spreadsheets and whatnot, a week in advance, and then request their presentations, ideally 72 hours in advance for everyone. So we have more than just 2 days to look over the spreadsheets.
Yeah, I've always felt it's really bad that the largest budget comes the week before the public hearing.
So unfortunately, we're kind of backed up with the rest of the time. We have to have our report, so our public hearing is scheduled for March 28th. We have to have a report to the town for the warrant, to get it in the warrant, which I know we missed last year, so we could always do that again and do as a supplemental. But that is due the Tuesday following our public hearing. So we don't have a lot of time to really digest any of the big stuff.
Yeah, and especially where, they are talking perhaps significant staffing cuts. I mean, I think there's a lot for us to work through and make recommendations on how to weather ourselves through that process.
I agree, and having a draft, not a finalized version, prior to the deadline, what they're proposing to be what, the 21st?
That's the 21st. It'll be presented to the school committee on the 20th for a vote, and then presented to us on the 21st.
So not a finalized version, but something to work with.
So our rule is that they need to get it to us 48 hours before the meeting. So if they want to do it on the 21st, they need it on the 19th.
So what I requested was exactly that. I said, as we're getting down to sort of a finalized budget, if there are multiple options towards the end, please present those to us, or at least give those to us. And I didn't get a response back regarding that. Just that they'll be on the 21st. So I'm going to continue at least requesting as much information as possible. I do recommend people watch the school committee meeting from last night, and I'll distribute the superintendent's slides the slide deck that she sent out. It's lengthy, but it is, at least from my understanding, it's going over the options that are able to be that the school committee has to work with, and the consequences of the cuts that they could possibly make. So if they take an FTE away from, this department, or from this paraprofessional position, or from this custodial position, this is kind of the fallout that they're predicting. As it stands, the town manager requested a 2.5% increase over last year's budget for the school committee, and the budget that initially was presented last night is 3.6% up from last year, which is a difference of about, I believe it's a little over $600,000. And I believe if you look at the difference so there was also some question about the grant-funded positions and how that's going to affect, if you remove those positions from health insurance premiums, whether or not that's still going to, how that's going to affect your 10% increase potentially for your overhead for that, and is there wiggle room for between those two? So I understand that there's a lot of moving parts for this, but I still think it's possible to get, an absolute worst-case scenario budget, an idealized budget, and then somewhere in the middle, at least.
I agree with that, and can this be added to topics for future meetings that we revisit when we get the information from the school committee on these budgets? Because, again, I agree with what Chris said, it's more than 50% of the budget overall, and it's a lot of information to digest, and in order to have intelligent conversation about it, you have to wrap your head around what they're proposing in the first place, even if it is a worst-case scenario. And then you could say, well, this is the worst case, and how can we make this better, and start asking questions and begin to understand what it is they're proposing at all.
I think there may be some concern about I imagine the superintendent wants to present realistic scenarios. And I can see a situation where she would not want to present worst-case scenarios because it doesn't look great. It's not something you want to actually present out, and you want to wait until you have as much information as possible to at least kind of start narrowing down that path. But at some point, that does become an issue with, and I guess, where do we draw that line? Where do we say, we would like to see whatever you have at this point? Without the authority to say, we would like to see whatever you have at this point.
I'm just going to go back to what I just previously said. I think in order to have an intelligent conversation about it, we all need time to digest the information.
I agree with that, and I think even if the data is not final, I think somewhere along the way that some kind of interim report needs to be discussed with us, because I think they should be conferring with us for for advice on this stuff. We're an advisory committee. We're not a rubber stamp committee, which I think sometimes people think we are.
I agree.
We could
And,
tell them it's just it's a snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
We're not holding them to it. It's just something to help us.
Yeah, and I can imagine that town manager, superintendent, capital, everything else is going to have to be weighed off against one another as we go through this process. And in this year especially, both sides have green finance directors, right? So it's going to be pretty challenging. I understand the challenge on both sides,
Right.
but I think waiting till the last minute to get to this committee is not in everyone's best interest.
Would it be worth inviting would it be worth inviting the chair of the school department, or the school committee, to our meeting on the February 8th, at least just to have a discussion and kind of, not to make demands or anything like that, but at least to have kind of an open discussion and say, this is kind of what we're hoping to get, and can we formulate this into some workable package that can be delivered ahead of the day before?
I don't see how it would be anything but positive to hear directly from the chair of the school committee, and for her to directly hear from all of us and our concerns about digesting the material.
And for that matter, probably the superintendent as well, since she puts the budget together for the school committee.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, whomever they, could be Brian as well, or
You can invite Peter. You
whoever.
want to invite Peter back?
Invite them all.
Shouldn't be here all night. Did I say that?
I think we are going to be here all night.
Okay. So yes, so we're going to move around. So the town manager will send out an updated calendar for our budget meetings. We'll be ideally moving PAC and sewer back to the 14th and LPA and the public schools forward to the 21st. It's doable, it will make it tight, but that gives us a week before we have our first public hearing. We can always have more than one public hearing. I think we have time for 3, if I remember correctly, before we kind of hit the deadline, we can't have any more. No, we don't. We have time for two public hearings, maybe 3, depends.
The downside is our decisions to support or not support may not make it into the warrant book. We need to have that date, the drop dead date to get.
That's exactly what I'm going off of, which I believe is 3 weeks ahead of the actual town meeting, if I remember correctly.
So 3 weeks ahead of May
1, 2,
4th.
3, so that's April 13th. So that would give us, in theory, we could have March 28th, April 4th, and April 11th, if it is 3 weeks. Historically, we will have 3 or 2 public hearings because there will be numbers that aren't published yet. So yes, that's the update that I have. Not the best update, but I have not actually sent out the request to the department heads. I spoke with the town manager earlier this week, just to kind of gauge her feelings on the idea of the request. But I will send that out tomorrow to all the department heads to request as early as possible to get us numbers. It doesn't have to be a presentation. We're perfectly fine working with just spreadsheets. I don't care what it is, just it could be on a piece of paper, just something with numbers on it. And then presentations kicked forward a day, if possible. Other than that, any other conversation about upcoming meetings? Fantastic. We can move on to public comment. Any public comment from the public? Is that Ms. Lockwood?
Yes, thank you, Evan. I just want to address Mr. Passio's comment about his perceived conflict of interest. I mean, he's talking about spouses, but I think he forgot to follow the same logic about him serving on the Green Committee Task Force, and also Evan, you serving on the Board of Health. I mean, now we're talking about not even a spouse removed. I also, I also don't find that comment to be useful in any purpose at all when you have, families that are committed to serving the town and that kind of questions get offered. And let's remember, again, this is a liaison position. So I just want to comment that, we don't have a lot of people offering to serve the town. That's why you have, one of the reasons you get repeated people is because it's hard to put yourself out there and as a family. And this type of comment, I find it to be detrimental, not just to the people that are serving this committee, but again, to the whole town. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment from the public? Seeing none, any public comment from the committee?
No.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, it is 9:41. It's a long one. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night.